My name is Sarah Pierce, and I just stepped into my 32nd year. I was genuinely looking forward to celebrating my father's 65th birthday at the observatory, known far and wide as the most prestigious restaurant in our city. My older siblings, Clara and Mark, had always been utterly consumed by appearances and the conventional markers of success. I, however, had chosen a less trodden path. What they didn't realize, what no one in my family knew, was that I had been carefully concealing my actual career from them for a very long time. My simple navy dress and understated pearl earrings were about to create an interesting contrast with their designer labels in a way none of us could have predicted. Before I tell you all about what unfolded that particular evening, I'd love it if you'd share where you're joining from in the comments below. And if stories about finding your own strength and speaking your truth resonate with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life accounts that you might find encouraging. I grew up in what you might describe as a comfortably well-off family, but one that became progressively more fixated on social standing and how we were perceived as the years went by. My father, Arthur Pierce, was the archetypal self-made man. He began with virtually nothing, the son of a mine worker and a seamstress, and had built a thriving engineering firm through sheer grit and an endless stream of 16-hour workdays. My mother, Eleanor Pierce, came from a similar background, though you'd never guess it from her cultivated poise. Once my father's business truly flourished, she transformed herself into a consummate social strategist, always cultivating relationships with the right crowd and obsessing over our family's public image. Then there were my siblings. My elder sister, Clara Pierce, was the star of the family from her earliest days. She graduated top of her class from a prestigious law school and immediately landed a coveted role at Sterling, Thorne and Associates, one of the nation's leading firms. Clara never missed an opportunity to remind everyone of her achievements, casually mentioning her alma mater in contexts where it had no relevance and treating her expensive wardrobe as an essential part of her professional identity. My brother, Mark Pierce, followed a comparable trajectory to prominence. He became a renowned cosmetic surgeon, his practice attracting a clientele of the rich and famous. Mark was, if possible, even more inclined to ostentation than Clara, frequently showcasing his newest sports car or sharing pictures from his lavish international holidays. He seemed to measure his self-worth almost entirely by his possessions and the admiration they garnered. And then there was me. I was always the outlier in my family. While they thrived on external validation and social interaction, I was more introspective, more driven by my internal values. I found joy in books, in creating, in pondering the deeper workings of the world. This inherent difference caused friction from a young age. "Sarah, why can't you try to be more like your sister?" became a familiar refrain from my mother throughout my upbringing. Look at Clara's flawless report cards. Look at the influential people she's connecting with. Despite my contrasting nature, I initially made an effort to follow the blueprint my parents had designed. I diligently earned a business degree from a reputable university, though not an Ivy League institution, which was, in their eyes, my first significant letdown. After graduating, I took a job at a large financial services company, settling into the career path my family anticipated. But 2 years into that role, I was profoundly unhappy. The work felt devoid of purpose. The corporate games were exhausting, and I couldn't imagine enduring it for another 4 decades. So I resigned. That choice cemented my family's view of me as the underachiever. "You had such a bright future ahead of you," my mother lamented when I shared my decision. "What on earth are we going to tell our acquaintances?" My father, who had been my staunchest ally when I was a child, just looked quietly crestfallen. He said little, but his silence was deafening. What my family didn't know, what I purposefully kept hidden, was my next move. While they believed I had accepted a role as an assistant manager at a quaint local art gallery, a position they considered suitably unimpressive, I was, in reality, investing all my savings and energy into establishing an innovative educational software company called BrightPath. The company developed engaging, accessible learning tools for underserved schools and students who might otherwise be left behind in the ever-widening digital gap. I vividly recall the last significant family gathering before my father's birthday dinner. It was Easter, and we were all at my parents' home, exchanging gifts. "This is quite nice, Sarah," my mother remarked with a strained smile as she unwrapped the silk scarf I'd chosen for her. "Very considerate. I imagine it must have been a stretch for you, given your circumstances." Clara smirked. "Probably a whole week's earnings from that little gallery, wouldn't you say, Sarah?" I try to keep my voice level. Some of us find value in contributing to others rather than just accumulating wealth. Mark scoffed. "That's the kind of thing people say when they can't accumulate wealth. There's a term for it: self-justification." My father merely observed this exchange in silence, periodically checking his watch as if he had more pressing engagements elsewhere. What none of them were aware of was that my company had just secured a major investment round, valuing BrightPath at over $90 million. The modest gallery job was merely a convenient cover, a way to stay connected to the art world I cherished while I built my company discreetly. I lived in a pleasant but unassuming apartment, drove a dependable but unremarkable car, and generally maintained a lifestyle that offered no clues to my actual financial success. Why did I conceal my accomplishments from my own family? Partly, it was an experiment. I wanted to see if they could appreciate and respect me for who I was inherently, not for what I had achieved or accumulated. I craved genuine connections based on something more profound than status. But another part of it was self-preservation. I had witnessed how money and success had altered my parents and siblings. I didn't want that transformation for myself. My relationship with my father was particularly complex. When I was younger, we had been very close. He would take me hiking on Sunday mornings, just the two of us, and share stories about his own upbringing and the tough lessons he'd learned. But as his company expanded and our family's social ambitions grew, he became more remote, more preoccupied with image and networking. The man who once told me that integrity was worth more than any bank balance now seemed to evaluate everyone, including his own children, primarily by their financial standing and social connections. 3 months before his birthday, my father experienced a significant health scare, a wake-up call for all of us. He recovered, thankfully, but it deeply affected me. Despite our strained dynamic, I loved him very much and wasn't ready to face losing him. I resolved to try and rebuild our connection, starting with his upcoming birthday celebration. Little did I imagine how that evening would truly play out. The morning of my father's birthday dinner dawned with a familiar mix of anticipation and apprehension. I stood before my wardrobe, carefully weighing my choices. I could, at last, reveal the truth about my success by dressing the part, arriving in the kind of designer attire my siblings would instantly recognize as a mark of affluence. A part of me was tempted, I confess. But that would negate the very purpose of the years I'd spent keeping my achievements private. Instead, I selected a classic, well-tailored dark blue dress. It was elegant and beautifully made, but not ostentatiously expensive to the status-sensitive eyes of my family. I paired it with simple silver earrings that had belonged to my grandmother and a delicate matching bracelet. Looking in the mirror, I appeared presentable and appropriate for a fine dining establishment, but nothing about my appearance signaled successful CEO. My phone buzzed as I was applying a final touch of lip gloss. It was Chloe, my closest friend since university, and one of the very few people privy to the truth about my company and my family situation. "Ready for tonight's big performance?" she asked after I answered. "As ready as I'll ever be," I sighed. A part of me just wants to lay it all out. End this whole charade. "You know my feelings on it, Chloe," she replied. "I think it's unusual you've kept this under wraps for so long, but I also get why you did. Just keep in mind, whatever unfolds tonight, you have absolutely nothing to prove to them. You've built something extraordinary, not just financially rewarding, but something that's genuinely making a positive impact on young people's lives." I smiled, thankful for her unwavering support. Last year on his birthday, Mark spent a good 20 minutes boasting about some celebrity procedure he'd done, and Clara kept interrupting to discuss her latest promotion. Neither of them asked me a single thing about my life. "Well, perhaps this year will be different," Chloe offered, though her tone suggested she was as skeptical as I was. After we ended the call, I carefully wrapped my father's gift, a rare, signed first edition of his favorite classic novel, a book that had taken me months of searching to find. It had cost a significant sum, more than most would spend, but I knew my family would likely interpret it as further proof of my limited resources compared to whatever grand gestures my siblings had planned. The observatory was situated in the city's vibrant heart, occupying the entire penthouse level of one of its most distinguished skyscrapers. I'd been there on numerous occasions, typically entertaining potential investors or partners for BrightPath. The restaurant's blend of breathtaking panoramic views, flawless service, and critically acclaimed chef made it the ideal venue for making an impression, which was precisely why it had been chosen for my father's birthday. What my family didn't know was that I was quite familiar to the staff there. BrightPath had sponsored several high-profile charity functions at the observatory, and I had cultivated a cordial relationship with Julian, the proprietor, and many of his team. I arrived about 15 minutes early, needing some time to compose myself before facing my family. As I exited the elevator into the restaurant's opulent lobby, I was immediately greeted by Isabella, the head hostess. "Miss Pierce, wonderful to see you again," she said with genuine warmth. "I'm here for my father's birthday dinner tonight. The reservation should be under Pierce." "Of course, I have it right here. The private suite has been prepared as you specified." She paused, looking a little puzzled. "I didn't realize this was a personal event for your family. Julian will certainly want to know you're here." "Actually, Isabella," I said softly, "I'd be grateful if you and the team could be discreet about recognizing me. My family isn't well. They're unaware of my company or my professional life. It's a somewhat complicated story." Isabella arched an eyebrow but nodded understandingly. "Of course, Miss Pierce, consider it handled." I chose a seat in the lounge area to wait, ordering a sparkling water. Through the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the city lights beginning to illuminate the twilight sky. That view always had a calming effect on me, a reminder of the vast world beyond my family's internal dramas. 20 minutes later, I saw my family arrive. First came my parents, my mother adorned in an unmistakably expensive dress and laden with jewelry, my father in a sharp suit, looking distinguished yet weary. They were followed by Clara and her husband, David, both appearing as if they'd stepped from the pages of a fashion editorial. Last to enter was Mark, making a grand display of handing his keys to the valet, ensuring everyone nearby noticed his latest luxury vehicle. I took a deep breath and walked towards them, gift in hand. "Happy birthday, Dad," I said, giving him a hug and handing him the wrapped book. He returned the embrace, a bit formally. "Sarah, thank you for making it." His focus was already shifting to a cluster of business acquaintances who had just entered, also invited to the celebration. My mother scanned me from head to toe with a discerning eye. "Couldn't you have made a little more effort for your father's special occasion?" she whispered. "That dress looks like it came from a department store sale." "It's lovely to see you too, Mom," I replied, keeping my tone light. Clara gave me an air kiss near my cheek, then murmured, "Honestly, Sarah, even the waitstaff here are dressed better than you. Do try not to be an embarrassment in front of Dad's colleagues, all right?" Mark arrived last, clapping me on the shoulder with a kind of forced cheerfulness he reserved for those he deemed beneath him. "Little sis, still embracing the minimalist budget look, I see. If you ever want some tips on investing whatever small amount you make so you can afford some respectable clothing, your big brother is here to help." I managed a smile, already feeling the familiar cocktail of hurt and frustration that family gatherings usually stirred in me. My father was now completely absorbed in greeting his business partners, barely registering my presence. I stood off to the side, observing as my family charmed and impressed the assembling guests, feeling like an outsider, as I had countless times before. After about 20 minutes of socializing in the reception area, the maitre d' approached my father. "Mr. Pierce, your private dining suite is prepared. If you and your guests would follow me." My family and the dozen or so business associates began to move as a group towards the rear of the restaurant. I fell into step behind them, clutching my small handbag, already feeling that familiar sense of being an afterthought, the family member included out of duty rather than genuine desire. As we neared the private dining suite, Clara suddenly turned and pulled me aside, her perfectly manicured hand gripping my arm a fraction too tightly. "Sarah," she said in a low, firm voice, yet loud enough for those close by to overhear. "Don't you think you're rather underdressed for this? This is the observatory, for heaven's sake." I glanced down at my simple dark blue dress. "I think I look perfectly fine, Clara. It's Dad's birthday, not a red carpet event." Her expression hardened. "This dinner is costing a fortune per person. Can you even afford to chip in for Dad's main gift from all of us?" Mark and I each contributed $5,000 towards the golf retreat in Aspen. Before I could formulate a response, Mark joined us, a champagne flute already in hand. "Any problem here? Dinner's about to be served." "I'm just a little concerned that Sarah might not feel entirely comfortable in such an exclusive setting," Clara said, her voice laced with feigned solicitude. "The menu here doesn't even show prices, you know." Mark's face adopted that condescending look I knew all too well. "Oh, don't you worry your little head about that. I can cover little Sarah's meal if she's a bit short on funds. What's family for, eh?" He chuckled, looking around to ensure others had witnessed his supposed generosity. My mother approached next, drawn by the slight commotion. "What's the holdup? Everyone is waiting." "Nothing, Mom," I said, attempting to move past them. "Let's just go in." "Actually," my mother said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "perhaps it might be better if you waited in the lounge until dinner is over. Some very influential clients of your father's are here, and the focus really needs to be on him, not on." She gestured vaguely at my attire. I felt a flush of anger and acute embarrassment rise to my cheeks. "You want me to skip Dad's birthday dinner because you're ashamed of how I look?" "Don't be so dramatic," Clara snapped. "We're thinking of you too. You'll only feel out of your element with all these accomplished individuals." I tried to defuse the escalating tension with a touch of humor. "Last I heard, you didn't need a specific income bracket to enjoy a piece of cake." No one laughed. Instead, Clara physically shifted to block the entrance to the private suite. "We only want successful people in here," she sneered. "This restaurant is far too expensive for someone like you." Mark nodded in agreement. "Seriously, Sarah, you'd be much more comfortable somewhere that's more your style. Like that diner near your gallery." He and Clara exchanged a private, knowing laugh. I became acutely aware that we were creating a very public scene. Diners at nearby tables were casting curious glances our way, and even some of my father's business associates had noticed the confrontation. My father himself stood chatting with some friends, either completely unaware of what was happening or deliberately choosing to ignore it. The public humiliation was far worse than anything they had said directly. I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller and less significant with each passing moment. My chest tightened, and for a terrifying instant, I feared I might actually cry, something I had vowed never to do in front of my family again. I caught sight of my mother pretending not to know me when a woman she knew from her charity committee glanced inquisitively in our direction. "Just someone who seems to have lost her way," I heard her murmur to the woman with an apologetic smile. The rejection stung like a physical blow. Despite everything, some small part of me had clung to the hope that beneath all the materialism and status-seeking, my family still loved me for who I was. That hope now felt utterly foolish and naive. A torrent of childhood memories flooded my mind, each one a painful precursor to this very moment, being relegated to the children's table long after my siblings had been promoted to dine with the adults, my academic successes being overlooked while Clara's and Mark's were celebrated with extravagant praise, being introduced to my parents' friends as our other daughter, with no mention of my interests or accomplishments. I was so lost in these painful reflections that I barely registered a security officer approaching, drawn by the disturbance we were causing. "Is there an issue here?" he inquired, his tone professional but firm. Clara turned to him with a practiced, charming smile. "No issue at all, officer. My sister was just on her way out." Her smug expression conveyed everything. She fully expected the security officer to escort me from the premises, delivering the final, crushing humiliation in her campaign to exclude me from our father's celebration. I felt a cold wave of anxiety wash over me. My hands trembled slightly, and I gripped my small clutch tighter to conceal it. The moment stretched, each second an agonizing eternity of mortification. I saw Mark's satisfied smirk, my mother's averted gaze, and worst of all, my father's continued indifference as he conversed with his associates, his back turned to the drama unfolding with his youngest child. The security officer looked at me more closely, and his expression suddenly shifted from stern professionalism to surprised recognition. "Ms. Pierce," he said, then with a distinct nod of respect, "Ma'am, your preferred corner suite is always ready if you'd find that more comfortable." The silence that ensued was absolute. I could almost hear the mental gears grinding as my family struggled to process what they had just heard. Before anyone could utter a word, the restaurant manager appeared, striding quickly across the floor with a look of distinct concern. "Miss Pierce," he said, addressing me directly, "we weren't aware you'd be joining your family this evening. Is everything to your satisfaction?" His tone made it unequivocally clear that I was a highly valued patron, someone whose contentment was a top priority. Clara's jaw had literally dropped, and she was looking back and forth between me and the manager in utter bewilderment. Mark's smirk had frozen on his face, his eyes narrowing as he desperately tried to make sense of the rapidly changing situation. The scenario escalated further when Jean-Pierre, the renowned head chef, emerged from the kitchen in his pristine whites. He headed straight for our group, beaming. "Miss Pierce, what an honor to see you tonight. I've been refining that saffron risotto you enjoyed on your last visit. I would be delighted to prepare it specially for you and your family." My mother's expression was a whirlwind of emotions, transforming from embarrassment to perplexity to rapid calculation, all within a few heartbeats. My father had finally turned from his conversation, noticing the commotion, and was watching with undisguised surprise. "Thank you, Jean-Pierre," I replied calmly. "That would be absolutely delightful." Julian, the owner of the observatory, chose that precise moment to make his appearance, completing the procession of senior staff coming to greet me. "Sarah, my dear, had I known you were gracing us with your presence for a family occasion, I would have arranged for the private terrace to be prepared for you and your party." He then turned to my stunned relatives. "Your daughter hosted our most successful fundraising gala just last month. Raised over $3 million for youth literacy programs." "Actually, Julian," I said quietly, "these are my parents and my brother and sister." Julian looked momentarily confused. "But I was under the impression when you acquired the building last year, you mentioned it was a strategic investment, not directly related to family affairs." The bombshell had well and truly landed. Not only did the staff know me as a regular, esteemed patron and a successful CEO, but I actually own the entire building that housed the observatory, one of the most valuable pieces of commercial real estate in the city. I watched as the power dynamic in our little group inverted completely. Clara's face had gone pale. Mark was visibly straightening his posture, his expression shifting from condescension to urgent reassessment. My mother looked as though she might actually faint, while my father simply stared at me, as if seeing me clearly for the first time in many years. The feeling that washed over me was complex. There was a certain undeniable satisfaction in witnessing their shocked expressions. I won't pretend otherwise. After years of being dismissed and patronized, the validation felt momentarily sweet. But alongside it, there was a profound sadness. It had taken this very public revelation of my wealth and status for them to look at me with something even approaching respect. The unspoken test I had set for them, hoping they might value me for myself rather than my achievements or possessions, had been unequivocally failed. "I believe there's been a slight misunderstanding," I said, keeping my voice remarkably steady. "I would be very happy to join my father's birthday celebration, if I am still welcome." Clara, ever the quick change artist, immediately shifted her approach. "Of course you are. It was just a silly bit of teasing that got a little out of hand. Weren't we, Mark?" Mark nodded vigorously. "Absolutely. Sibling banter. You know how we are." My mother had already managed to slip her arm through mine, as if we had been the closest of confidants all along. "Darling, you should have told us about your company. All this time we imagined. I know what you imagined," I said softly. gently disengaging my arm from hers. And that is precisely why I chose not to tell you. Julian, sensing the lingering tension, smoothly interjected. The Pierce party's private suite is ready. Shall I escort you all? Yes, thank you, Julian, I replied. As we walked towards the dining room, now with me inexplicably at the head of the procession rather than trailing behind, I made a conscious decision. I could leverage this revelation with bitter triumph, throwing their previous treatment back in their faces, or I could choose the higher path. For my own peace of mind, and out of a lingering affection I still held for my family despite everything, I opted for the latter. The staff guided us to what everyone in the restaurant recognized as Sarah's table, the premier spot in the house with its unparalleled panoramic views of the city skyline. My family followed in uncharacteristic silence, the usual jostling for position and attention temporarily suspended as they processed the seismic shift in their understanding of their supposedly unsuccessful daughter and sister. As we settled into our seats, I caught my father's eye across the table. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, he was looking at me with genuine curiosity rather than distracted tolerance. I wasn't sure yet if that represented true progress or just another form of conditional interest, but it was at least a discernible change. The private dining suite at the observatory was everything one would expect from an establishment of its renown. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, inviting glow over the impeccably set table. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking vista of the city lights. A string trio played softly in a discreet corner. My family and my father's business associates took their seats, with me now placed prominently near my father, rather than at the far end of the table where I would typically have been relegated. The restaurant staff moved around us with quiet efficiency, presenting menus bound in supple leather and describing the evening's culinary highlights with practiced eloquence. I noticed Clara positioning herself next to one of my father's most affluent clients, clearly attempting to network. Mark was engaged in a similar endeavor on the other side of the table. Old habits, it seemed, died hard. So, Sarah, Clara said, loudly enough for everyone at the table to hear. Do tell everyone about your wonderful company. I've always been so incredibly proud of my successful sister. I raised an eyebrow at her. Just an hour ago, she had been physically barring me from entering this very room. Yes, please do share, Sarah, Mark chimed in. I always had a feeling you were involved in something truly impressive. All that secrecy was so intriguing. He gave a forced, hollow laugh. My mother was already regaling the woman seated next to her with an entirely fabricated account of how she had consistently nurtured Sarah's entrepreneurial spirit. She gets that drive from me, you know, she was saying. I always encouraged her to think innovatively. The entire scene felt utterly surreal. The very same people who had been visibly embarrassed by my presence were now eagerly trying to bask in my reflected success. The transformation would have been almost comical if it weren't so painfully transparent. Throughout the appetizer course, I answered questions about Brightpath politely but concisely. Yes, I had founded it 5 years prior. Yes, it provided educational software to under-resourced schools. No, I had not actively sought publicity for my role as CEO. As the main course was being served, several business associates from nearby tables made a point of stopping by to greet me. One was a significant investor in educational technology. Another headed a foundation that had partnered with Brightpath on several key initiatives. Each interaction seemed to visibly discomfort my siblings, who were realizing just how connected and respected I was in circles they had been desperately trying to penetrate for years. Why didn't you ever tell us, Sarah? My father finally asked during a lull in the conversation. It was the first direct question he had posed to me all evening. The table fell silent. Everyone suddenly seemed intensely interested in my response. I set down my fork and looked around at the expectant faces of my family. The moment of truth had arrived, and despite my earlier resolution to take the high road, I knew I needed to be honest. I didn't tell you, I said quietly, because, in the way that should matter between family members, it wouldn't have made a difference. What do you mean by that? My mother asked, looking genuinely perplexed. Of course, it would have mattered. We would have been so immensely proud. That's precisely my point, I replied. You're proud now because I'm successful by your definition. But for years, when you believed I was just managing an art gallery, did you ever once ask me if I was happy? Did you ever show any genuine interest in my life or the choices I made? Clara shifted uncomfortably in her seat. We were concerned about you, Sarah. We simply wanted more for you. No, I said, firmly but calmly. You wanted me to be more like you. There's a significant difference. I turned to my father. Dad, do you recall when I was 12 and won that regional art competition? My painting was featured in a local magazine, and I was so thrilled to show you. But that was the same week Clara received her acceptance letter from her prestigious university, and no one even remembered to attend the awards ceremony for me. My father looked down at his plate, a flicker of guilt crossing his features. Or when I consistently made the honor roll every semester throughout high school, but it was never really acknowledged because Mark was in medical school, and that was considered real achievement. We were just trying to motivate you to reach your full potential, my mother interjected.
No, ikuntara gently.
You were teaching me that my worth was intrinsically tied to a very specific, externally validated kind of success. When I left the corporate world to pursue something I truly believed in, something that I felt would make a positive difference, you all treated me as if I had failed. The only metrics that ever seemed to matter to any of you were money and status. Clara's face hardened. So, you deliberately deceived us for years? You allowed us to believe you were struggling financially while you were secretly building some tech empire. How is that not a form of manipulation? I didn't deceive you, I stated. I simply didn't volunteer information. I wanted to ascertain if you could respect me and my choices without the validation of wealth. I wanted to be valued for who I am as a person, not for what I've accomplished or acquired. That's not fair, Sarah, Mark argued. You effectively set us up to fail an examination we didn't even know we were taking. Perhaps, I acknowledged. But consider this. Would we be having this conversation right now if the security guard hadn't recognized me? Would I even be seated at this table? Or would I be alone in the lounge, excluded from my own father's birthday dinner because I didn't appear successful enough? The uncomfortable, protracted silence that followed was answer enough. I looked around at the faces of my family members, seeing the defensiveness, the embarrassment, and in some instances, the faintest glimmers of genuine reflection. I don't want an apology, I said. And I'm certainly not trying to spoil Dad's birthday. I just want you all to understand that the way we've related to each other as a family has been fundamentally broken for a very long time. Tonight simply made it impossible to ignore any longer. My father cleared his throat. Sarah, would you join me on the terrace for a few moments? I believe we need to talk privately. As we stood to leave the table, I noticed the complex mix of emotions on my siblings' faces. Clara looked defensive and somewhat angry, but also undeniably confused, as if her entire worldview had been challenged in a way she couldn't immediately process or dismiss. Mark appeared calculating at first, but there was something else there too, a hint of genuine introspection that I hadn't witnessed from him in years. My mother simply looked lost, her carefully constructed social script for the evening completely disrupted. For once, she didn't have a ready comment or a practiced smile to deploy. I followed my father out to the private terrace, unsure of what would come next, but feeling, for the first time in many years, that something real and meaningful might finally be said between us. The terrace was tranquil, a peaceful sanctuary from the tension-filled dining room we had just vacated. The city sprawled out beneath us, a dazzling tapestry of lights against the deepening night sky. My father stood at the railing, looking older and more vulnerable than I had seen him in many years. I had an entire speech prepared for tonight, he said after a long moment, his voice subdued, about my journey from humble beginnings to success, about legacy, and the importance of hard work. It all seems rather hollow now. I waited, giving him the space to continue. Where did we go so wrong with you, Sarah? He asked, his voice thick with emotion. When did I stop truly seeing you? The question cut straight to the core of the matter, and I felt unexpected tears welling in my eyes. It was a gradual process, Dad, I replied, my voice a little shaky. When I was little, you used to tell me that character and integrity mattered more than anything. You taught me to value honesty and compassion. But as the business grew, as we moved into larger houses and more exclusive neighborhoods, something shifted. Success began to mean only one thing: money and the social standing it could buy. My father nodded slowly. I grew up with absolutely nothing, Sarah. You know that. There were winters when we couldn't afford to heat the entire house properly. Nights when dinner was little more than bread and whatever vegetables were cheapest that week. He sighed deeply. I vowed to myself that my children would never experience that kind of hardship and insecurity. Somewhere along the way, I think providing that security morphed into chasing status. I understand that, Dad.
I truly do.
But in shielding us from material insecurity, you inadvertently created a different kind of insecurity, one where we never felt entirely sure of your love and approval unless we were achieving in the specific ways you valued. He turned to face me fully, his eyes filled with a sorrow I hadn't seen before.
I am so sorry, Sarah.
Truly. It's no excuse, but I genuinely never saw it happening. And now, I discover that my youngest daughter, the one I've been worried about and, if I'm honest, a little embarrassed by, is actually more successful, in the truest sense, than any of us. I shook my head. That's still slightly missing the point, Dad. My company's success isn't what makes me worthy of your respect or attention. I know, he said quietly. I know that now. Or at least, I'm beginning to. He hesitated, then asked, the advanced medical treatment I received after my heart condition, the experimental procedure that wasn't covered by our insurance, was that you? I nodded. The procedure had cost close to $500,000, and I had anonymously arranged for the payment when I learned my father's insurance had denied coverage. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Would you have accepted it if you knew it came from me? I posed gently. From the daughter you believed was barely making ends meet at an art gallery? He had no answer for that, which was, in itself, answer enough. I'd like to get to know you again, Sarah, he said, his voice earnest. The real you. Not as a successful CEO or by whatever titles you've earned, but as my daughter. If you'll give me that chance. The sincerity in his voice moved me deeply. I'd like that too, Dad. When we returned to the table, the atmosphere had palpably shifted. My father seemed more present, more engaged with everyone around him, but particularly with me. Throughout the remainder of the dinner, he asked me questions about my life, my company, my passions, listening with genuine interest rather than the distracted politeness I had grown so accustomed to. After dessert was served, my mother asked me to accompany her to the powder room, an obvious pretext for a private conversation. Once we were alone, she turned to me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I don't know what to say, Sarah. I feel as though I don't know you at all. That's because you never really tried to, I replied, not unkindly. You were too preoccupied with trying to mold me into someone else. I just wanted you to have all the advantages I never had, she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. You have no idea what it was like for me growing up. The shame of wearing hand-me-down clothes, of living on the wrong side of town. When I met your father, and we began to find success, I promised myself my children would have every opportunity. For the first time, I saw my mother with a new clarity, not as the polished socialite she had become, but as the insecure young girl she had once been, still subconsciously driving her decisions decades later. Mom, I understand wanting to protect us from the things that hurt you. But you have to see that you were, in many ways, imposing your own fears and insecurities onto us, especially onto me because I didn't conform to your specific idea of success. She nodded slowly. Your sister and brother were easier. They desired the things I believed they should desire. You were always different, always asking questions I didn't have the answers for. She looked at me then, with a new, appraising light in her eyes. I am proud of what you've built, Sarah. I just wish I understood it better. That's the thing, Mom, I said gently. You never asked, but it's not too late to start. Our conversation wasn't a magical fix for years of accumulated misunderstanding, but it was a definite beginning. I set clear boundaries about what I would and wouldn't accept moving forward. And for perhaps the very first time, my mother truly listened. When we rejoined the party, Clara cornered me by the dessert buffet. "So, you've been secretly judging us all this time," she began, her tone still defensive. "No more than you've been openly judging me," I replied evenly. She flinched slightly at that. "I've been successful by any conventional metric. I've worked incredibly hard to get where I am. I've never questioned your work ethic, Clara. What I've questioned is the way you've measured your worth, and mine, solely by external markers of achievement," says the secret multimillionaire. She scoffed, though there was less conviction in her voice now. "The point isn't how much money I have or don't have," I explained patiently. "It's that even when you believed I had very little, you could have still chosen to treat me with respect and genuine interest. You could have valued my apparent happiness in a career I supposedly loved. Instead, you perceived me as an embarrassment to be managed or marginalized." Clara was quiet for a moment, visibly considering my words. "I've been envious of you," she finally admitted, the confession clearly difficult for her. "Even when I thought you were just working at that little gallery." "Envious of what?" I asked, surprised. "You always seemed content. Free, in a way I've never felt. Do you have any idea what it's like working 80-hour weeks at a job you largely despise, because you're terrified of disappointing everyone if you admit you made a monumental mistake?" It was a rare moment of unvarnished vulnerability from my perpetually composed sister. "Why do you stay, then?" I asked gently. "What else would I possibly do? This is who I am, who I've painstakingly made myself into. It's never too late to change direction, Clara. Trust me on that." Our conversation wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was the first truly honest exchange we'd had in many years. Clara's defensiveness was deeply ingrained, but I saw small cracks appearing in the facade, hints of the sister I remembered from our childhood before status and professional achievement had become her entire identity. Mark approached me as the evening was winding down. "So, all this time, while I've been flaunting my cars and my celebrity clients, you've been quietly building something that actually makes a difference," he said with uncharacteristic self-awareness. "Your work matters too, Mark. Helping people feel confident about their appearance isn't insignificant." He shrugged. "Some of it matters, I suppose. A lot of it is just catering to vanity, and I'm fully aware of it. I haven't performed surgery for a genuine medical necessity in years." He looked at me, a curious expression on his face. "Are you truly happy, Sarah? With your life, your company, all of it?" The question surprised me, especially coming from Mark. "Most days, yes," I replied thoughtfully. "I genuinely believe in what I'm doing. It's not always easy, but it feels meaningful." He nodded, a pensive look in his eyes. "I don't know if I can honestly say the same. I've been chasing the next achievement, the next status symbol, for so long that I'm not even sure what I actually want anymore." He gave a wry, self-deprecating smile. "Pretty pathetic, wouldn't you say?" "Not pathetic," I said. "Human. We all get caught up in seeking external validation sometimes. Some of us more than others," he acknowledged quietly. As the birthday cake was brought out and everyone sang to my father, I looked around at my family with new eyes. They were still flawed, still carrying the insecurities and status anxieties that had defined our relationships for so many years. But tonight had cracked open something authentic, creating a space for more genuine connections if we were all brave enough to nurture them. Before the evening concluded, I invited them all to visit Bright Path the following week. To my genuine surprise, they all accepted. The company visit was an eye-opening experience for them. They saw me in my element, leading a team of dedicated, passionate professionals who clearly respected me not because of my title, but because of my leadership and vision. They toured our innovation hub, where software developers and educational specialists collaborated to create programs that adapted to diverse learning styles and individual needs. They heard heartfelt testimonials from schools in underserved communities where our software had significantly helped raise literacy rates and math proficiency. Most impactfully, they learned about the philanthropic projects funded by our company's foundation, The schools we had helped build in developing nations, the scholarship programs for promising students from disadvantaged backgrounds, the teacher training initiatives in communities that struggled to attract and retain qualified educators. I didn't show them these things to boast, but to help them understand what truly mattered to me, what success looked like through my eyes rather than theirs. And slowly, I began to see signs that they were, at the very least, trying to understand. 6 months after that revelatory birthday dinner, much had changed within my family. The transformation wasn't instantaneous or magical, but it was real and ongoing. My father surprised me the most. Within weeks of learning about BrightPath, he had initiated a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs from underprivileged backgrounds, leveraging his extensive business experience and connections to help them navigate challenges he understood all too well from his own journey. He called me regularly, sometimes for advice about the program, sometimes just to check in and have the kinds of meaningful conversations we had missed out on for so many years. I was defining success far too narrowly, Sarah, he told me during one of our lunch meetings. Watching you with your team, seeing the profound impact of your work, it's made me reevaluate a great many things. My mother's transformation was slower and perhaps more reluctant. Old habits of status-seeking and social positioning were deeply ingrained, but even she began to show signs of change. She started volunteering once a week at a local community center in a neighborhood she would previously have avoided entirely. At first, she did it somewhat grudgingly, as a concession to the new family dynamic, but gradually I noticed her speaking about the people she met there with genuine interest and respect. Clara, ever the pragmatist, found a way to align her formidable career with more meaningful work without completely abandoning her hard-earned position. She began taking on pro bono cases focused on educational access and equity, using her considerable legal expertise to advocate for students from marginalized communities. It suited her competitive nature while channeling it towards something beyond mere personal advancement. "I'm still working insane hours," she admitted during one of our newly instituted sister dinners. "But for the first time in years, I don't actually mind. Some of these cases genuinely matter." Thomas, perhaps, underwent the most dramatic internal shift. After a period of intense soul-searching, he restructured his practice to include a significant portion of reconstructive work for accident victims and survivors of trauma, particularly those who couldn't afford such vital procedures. He still maintained his lucrative cosmetic practice, but the balance had shifted noticeably. "I had forgotten why I initially went into medicine," he confided in me. "It wasn't primarily for the status or the money, at least not originally. It was because I genuinely wanted to help people feel whole again." As for me, my own journey of healing and self-discovery continued. The initial sting of rejection at the restaurant had certainly left its marks. I couldn't deny that. There were still moments when I wondered if my family's newfound respect and interest were truly for me as a person or just another form of status recognition. Family relationships are invariably complex, layered with history and unspoken expectations, and they don't transform overnight. But I was learning to find peace within myself, to validate my own choices without perpetually needing their approval. The truth was, I hadn't been entirely honest with myself about my reasons for hiding my success for all those years. Yes, I had wanted to be loved for who I was, rather than for what I had achieved. But I had also been shielding myself from vulnerability, using secrecy as a defense mechanism against potential rejection. Now, I was learning to be more authentic with them, to share both my successes and my struggles, to allow them to know the real me, with all my complexities. Sometimes, they rose to the occasion beautifully. Other times, they slipped back into old patterns. We were all, in essence, works in progress. Our family dinners, once strained performances of achievement and status, gradually became more genuine and relaxed. We still had moments of tension and misunderstanding, of course, but there was also more laughter, more vulnerability, and a growing ability to see and accept each other as we truly were. BrightPath continued to thrive and expand. We launched new initiatives focused on providing educational technology to refugee communities and developing specialized tools for students with learning differences. I found myself increasingly passionate about creating pathways to opportunity for young people, regardless of their background or circumstances. My father and I even began collaborating on an educational foundation that combined his business acumen with my technological innovation. It was a partnership neither of us could have conceived of a year earlier, one that drew on the best of what each of us had to offer. The profound lesson I took from this entire experience was that true worth isn't measured by wealth, professional achievements, or social standing. It's found in integrity, in living according to your deeply held values, in striving to create a positive impact in whatever sphere you inhabit. Success that comes at the expense of authentic human connection is, ultimately, no success at all. I also learned that people can genuinely change, even after decades of entrenched patterns. My family was far from perfect, and our evolving relationships required constant nurturing and occasional course correction. But the progress we had made demonstrated that it's never too late to build something more genuine, more satisfying, and more closely aligned with our deepest values. That evening at the observatory, when my family attempted to exclude me for not meeting their superficial standards of success, became a pivotal turning point rather than an ending. It forced a reckoning that, painful as it was, ultimately created the space for profound growth and renewal. Sometimes, it takes a moment of complete breakdown to build something far better and more resilient in its place. As I reflect on that evening and everything that followed, I'm reminded that authenticity eventually reveals who truly belongs in our lives and the terms on which they belong. Some relationships deepen when confronted with truth, others may dissolve, and perhaps that's as it should be. The connections that remain, those tested by honesty and rooted in mutual respect, are the ones truly worth nurturing. Has your family ever judged you based on outward measures of success? Have you ever had to stand up for your own definition of what truly matters in life? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. If this journey of moving from rejection to reconciliation resonated with you, please give this video a like and consider subscribing for more stories about authentic connection and personal growth. Thank you so much for listening, and always remember that your inherent worth is never defined by others' limited perceptions of success.